In the movie Shutter Island, Teddy Daniels is innocent, as are you, the viewer. Now, what do I mean by this? Since the film Shutter Island came out, the popular consensus has been that Teddy was insane the whole time, that he was crazy and coping with the fact that he murdered his wife by creating this elaborate story. Um, I'm here to tell you that after several viewings of this film, I've come to the conclusion that that's not the case, and it's actually the opposite. And the film is a metaphor for the film industry implanting ideas and images in your head, much like the film Inception warned us about. So, Shutter Island begins with Teddy arriving on the boat with his partner Chuck, and they're they're on the island to investigate the disappearance of Rachel Salondo. Once they get there, they're immediately taken by um, the guards who explain the rules to them, and this can be a stand-in for the filmmakers explaining what the plot is, or the rules of the film. And this is a red herring. So when people see this film once through and it's revealed at the end that Teddy is crazy, they will go back and watch it again. And there's a lot of clues like Teddy's seasickness. Um, I don't know. There's a bunch of clues right early in the movie that he is crazy. Like all the cops not really helping him with his investigation, and the nurses hinting that Sheen is a doctor. And these are all red herrings put there for the audience to consider themselves smart by picking up on these clues, and that this is a closed case. This film is just about that Teddy is crazy and nothing more than that. Um, but really, what this is the filmmakers um, saying, "Hey, we're in charge here. We know what you as a patient, as a viewer, how you analyze films. So we're going to put in all these clues. So when you analyze the film, that's all you look for. You don't look for the other meaning, even though we're going to put another meaning right in your face." It's known that Shutter Island is an anagram for truths and lies, and that is what this film is about. It's telling you some truth and telling you some lies. But often the misconception is what the truth and the lies are. I think most of the time people get it backwards what the real truth in the movie is. Shutter is also a name for an element of a camera, and therefore Shutter Island can be taken to be a metaphor for Hollywood itself. And the lighthouse, which is where the climax of the film occurs, is where patients or viewers are lobotomized and turned into ghosts. The lighthouse is the cinema. So after all of these, probably the first half an hour of the film is all about putting all these red herrings and clues in. The lie of this is actually exposed very early. Dr. Jeremiah, he represents a one of the filmmakers, and he says to Teddy, "You have outstanding defense mechanisms," as in defense mechanisms against what the film is trying to convince him of. This whole film is like an inception. It's planting an idea into Teddy's mind that he's guilty, that he then experiences through his own dreams, and therefore he thinks he came up with the idea of that himself. Dr. Jeremiah continues, "Men like you are my speciality, men of violence," and that refers to men. It could be women too, who like these like violent psychological thriller films, and that is also represented by Ward C. They say there's Ward A for our male patients, Ward B for our female patients. That could be a reference to there's sort of more male targeted films and female targeted films, and then Ward C are for our most violent patients, and they're people who enjoy films like Shutter Island or Seven, films of that nature. Teddy snaps and he says, "Who the hell is really in charge here?" Which is sort of a question of an angry audience member, like, what sort of film am I really seeing? And then later on, when he's talking to his partner Chuck, he says, "We haven't heard the truth once yet." This is a clue to the audience that this intro, and there's a lot of dramatic music. Anytime music is played, that is when it's the fantasy. That's when it's the lie. This is a clue to the audience that we haven't heard the truth once yet. We've only heard lies, but we're about to hear truths. Also, interestingly, Chuck uses a bit of shaming language on Teddy to say are we really packing in? I've never quit anything before, which is when Teddy's about to quit. And then that's when Teddy says, we haven't heard the truth once yet. After this, Teddy has a dream, and it uses the song On the Nature of Daylight, which is a beautiful song, but it's the first dream about Dolores, his wife, who, and the dream is about in this apartment, it's not in this house, like the final scene. And as the film goes on, his dreams get closer and closer to that memory that traumatic memory that they want him to have. But at the start, he doesn't have it because it's not one of his real memories. Teddy reveals to his partner Chuck that he's been looking into this place, Shutter Island, which is the standard for Hollywood, and says they've been conducting experiments on the mind through movies. Obviously, he doesn't say that, but that's the implication. Um, and then they're sort of talking about how do you believe a crazy guy. So anyone who's going to come out and say that Hollywood is this place for crazy people, how are they going to be believed? Nobody listens when crazy people think. Teddy talks about being in the war, and we fought a war to stop, and now I find it might be happening here on our soil. Now I'm going to get the proof. I'm going to blow the lid off this place. He's talking about how the propaganda and this mind control that there was in Germany in World War II, and how the US have taken that technology and are now using it on their own citizens. And then Chuck says it's no coincidence that you're here while you were looking into them, they were looking into you. They're finding these people of interest like Teddy and eliminating them. And also they're working on experiments on the audience. They're working out what their audience, what their citizens are really like. Moving ahead a bit, there's this really interesting scene with George Noyes, and it really is more truth. It's telling you, George is telling the audience member exactly what's going on. Teddy says it's about exposing the truth, and George says it's about you. This is a game. All of this is for you. You're not investigating anything. You're a fucking rat in a maze. And what that means is the audience, there is no story of Shutter Island. It's just a made up story. There's no real investigation. The audience member is being manipulated. And then George says, you've been alone much. He says, I've got a partner, but he never worked with him before. But he says, like, I trust this man. And George says, well, then they've already won. And that's a bit like the moviegoers trusting the movie. It's people that they've never met before, but they trust them fully. They trust that they have their best interests at heart. And, you know, even myself, who was skeptical of this film when it came out, that the ending wasn't as simple as it first seemed. It took me over a decade to work out this theory that it's really about the film itself, as opposed to they're just messing with Teddy. I don't know, for the sake of it, but the actual reason behind that took me a long time to work out. So the film can sort of blatantly say these things and be confident that the viewers won't work it out. Then once again, On the Nature of Daylight plays and Dolores shows up, and Teddy's attention moves from George, who's sort of telling him exactly what's going on in the film, back to Dolores, and he says, she's fucking with your head. She's going to kill you. You want to uncover the truth. You want to let it go. And Teddy says, I can't. And then George says, well, you never leave this island. And that means the audience is unable to let go of the fantasy story. On the Nature of Daylight, it really pulls you in. Dolores, like, I guess you'd say almost all men have this ideal love interest. Dolores is played by Michelle Williams, who's beautiful, and it pulls you into this fantasy story. We've seen lots of movies before with the love interest or tragedy. Like, we don't even get to know much about her, but just that simple imagery, that representation, makes us yearn for that or get sucked into the fantasy story. And even though Teddy says he's looking for the truth, as soon as something fake, this fantasy story comes up, he can't be helped but get sucked into it. And George says, well, hey, God help you, as he's leaving. Like, he knows that Teddy is screwed, that he's not going to get out of this with the truth, even though the whole middle part of the movie is him being given all this truth. And then we move to the Rachel Solando scene, which is probably the eye of the duck scene in the whole movie. It really just lays out what the movie's about. And Rachel is an ex doctor, so she might be like an ex Hollywood executive or director or actor, and she's sort of telling the audience exactly what's going on. It goes back to that idea of being crazy, and um, we're comparing this to what happened in Nazi Germany, and that we were just watching a few films. Is it really that bad? But it is really the beginning of mind control. Um, and yeah, she says, "You think I'm crazy?" And Teddy, who's standing for the audience, says, "I'm not following you. I'm sorry." And it's like the audience doesn't get what's going on. They don't get this film. There's not a lot of action. It's just a lot of conversations, people being very direct with what is happening, but the audience still doesn't understand it because they're wrapped up in this romantic idea of what films are. Um, and yeah, this is interesting. Rachel says they go through the eye. She's talking about the lobotomy, but films go through the eye. That's where you take them in. Makes the patients or the viewers much more obedient. The brain controls pain, fear, sleep, hunger, empathy, anger, everything. What if you could control it? Recreate a man so he doesn't feel pain or love or sympathy. A man who can't be interrogated because he has no memories. And Teddy's like, well, that would take years of research, And then Rachel's like, yes, years and years of research, hundreds of patients to experiment on. 50 years from now, people will look back and say, here, this place, Hollywood, is where it all began. The Nazis used the Jews, Soviets used prisoners of their own gulags, and we, the USA, tested patients on Shutter Island. And Shutter Island can be considered there as the metaphor of Shutter Island of Hollywood, or it can be considered as Shutter Island, the movie itself, especially given what people's reactions were to this movie, that they were able to see this, they were able to get there was so much revelation of the method. There was all these scenes telling you what was going on, but people took away that, well, that was Teddy all being crazy. That people are able to let themselves be convinced by this film that Teddy and therefore themselves are crazy, despite all this truth that is being dropped throughout the whole movie. Teddy asks what goes on in the lighthouse, which is the cinema. Rachel says, brain surgery. Let's open the skull and see what happens if we pull on this. They learned it from the Nazis, from their propaganda. It's where they create ghosts. And ghosts are just these passive consumers that people have become, consuming progressively worse films. It's the brain itself is unable to tell the difference between what happened in reality and in a film if it views it. And the cinema is the battleground for that, where they are doing mind control on people. And then Teddy asks, who knows about this on the island? Meaning, who knows about this in Hollywood? And Rachel says, everyone. And Teddy's like, that's not possible. And she says, everyone knows. Um, and it's sort of saying, yeah, everyone on Hollywood is in on this. They all understand what they're doing. It's no accident. And then we get to these final truths. So Teddy sort of has a showdown with the warden and both doctors. And the warden says, like, picks him up and so then says to him, like, that he knows he's incredibly violent because he himself is incredibly violent. He says that he understands human nature. The secrets of human nature have been out for centuries, and these games of control and lying to each other have been going on and on for centuries. This is not something new. He's telling it straight to Teddy. He's telling it straight to the audience. Is your violence better than my violence? And his violence is the film that the audience is now watching. He says, if I were to sink my teeth into your eye, could you stop me before I blinded you? And that's again another reference to the eye, the lobotomy. He's saying, if you watch this film, could you get out, or could you understand the film well enough to not be convinced of the lie? And Teddy says, I'll give it a try. And the warden says, that's the spirit. It's they enjoyed this game. They're messing with you. And can you beat it? Most people can't. Most people believe the lies. And then Dr. John tells him soon after, he says, well, Teddy says, I'm looking for my partner. And he says, you don't have a partner. So he just blatantly lies to him because he's had a partner the whole time there. And then Dr. John says to him again, tell me again about your partner. And Teddy says, I don't have a partner. He started going along with the fantasy, with the lie that they're telling him. And verbalization is the first step of control. And Teddy is now falling into their control. And finally, he runs into Dr. Jeremiah in the hallway, who tries to drug him, which is a pretty blatant form of control. And he tells Teddy he's dangerous. He says, what does provoke you? Memories, dreams. and dreams is obviously what is explored in Inception. And Teddy's been having dreams throughout this whole film that is leading him to believe that he murdered his wife when in fact he didn't. And trauma. Um, he talks about trauma comes from the word wound in German or Greek. And then he says, wounds create monsters, and you are wounded, Marshall. When you see a monster, you must stop it. So they're creating these monsters by creating this trauma and then saying, well, now you're dangerous. You have to be stopped. Teddy gives him a taste of his own medicine and escapes. And then he gets to the lighthouse. Now, a lot is made about the very end of this film where Teddy goes off to get lobotomized. Like he just gives up, which is what the film is encouraging you to do, to give up and accept that you're crazy, which is something you should resist. But it's all about, oh, well, he goes to the lighthouse and gets lobotomized, but we actually already see a scene in the lighthouse. So this is what the lobotomy actually is. It's Dr. John and Dr. Sheehan lying to him and giving him all this fake trauma that never happened. This is like the experience of going to the film. When he's in there, he gets this vision of Dolores saying, "Get out of here, Teddy. This place is going to be the end of you," which is telling to the audience that you need to get out of here because this place is going to be the end to you. He's, Teddy, the last hour of this film has been, or more, like an hour and a half, has been blatantly telling you the truth. Teddy knows all the truth. He's coming in here to have the showdown. But Dr. John is too smart for him. He says, your delusions are getting worse. We've been using this on you for 24 months. And then great line, Teddy says, after everything I've seen here, doctor, do you really think you convinced me I'm crazy? And they do. They convince Teddy that he's crazy. They convince the audience that Teddy was crazy. They've just presented a film for an hour and a half, but with a few slick moves, they're too good for you. They can convince you that no, it was just a lie the whole time, but really this is the lie. And then we get to the anagram of Teddy Daniels having the same name as Andrew Laeddis, and it's like back to the start of the film with the rules, like, oh well, if the rules are this way, then that's the truth, and then people will say, oh my god, like I could have worked that out, like as if anyone is going to be thinking about anagrams like in the middle of a film. It's just ridiculous, but people will consider that and throw out the last hour and a half of truth bombs they've just been getting. Teddy stammers. He says, let's just get down to the facts. He knows he's right, but John, the most gaslighty line I've ever heard, says, I wish I could let you live in your fantasy land, which in reality, this is the fantasy that they're creating for him. But Teddy, despite knowing the truth, the audience, maybe despite knowing the truth, gets outsmarted. They're outslicked. The Dr. John and the movie makers, they've got the secrets of the human psyche, and even if they give you all the truth, that they could still, it's like playing chess and giving you an extra queen, but they can still pull the rug from out from you because they're just that much better at the game than you. He says, unless you go along with us, that they'll lobotomize you. And Teddy says to him, you turn me into one of your ghosts, which is what he's doing. He shows him the pictures of the dead girls. Teddy says, I never had a little girl. And then it's only after that, all that barrage of inputs, that he has the famous vision of, his wife with the three dead bodies of the girls, and on the nature of daylight plays, and he kills her, and then he flatly accepts that that's what he's done and that he's evil, and that's the takeaway that most people get. Obviously, the final lines from Teddy, would it be better to live as a monster or die as a good man? People think it's about him being a monster, living or dying as a good man, but really it can be said to be about the the doctors, Hollywood, whatever, that they're the monsters and Teddy is the good man. But people just accept that this is the ending, that he was crazy, that he did all these things. But really, I hope, having listened to this, you can take away that perhaps the real lies of what happens at the beginning and the end of the film, the parts of the film that will be remembered most by the audience, and the truth lies in the middle that people forget about. But anyway, if you have any thoughts on this, please comment, and like and subscribe. And thank you for listening.